Okay, so animation in Cinema 4D. Animation through a variety of 3D programs and a lot of other animationable programs are very similar, to be perfectly honest. So the principle is pretty much the same in all of the others. But firstly, let's create an object for us to animate. So I'm going to create a cube. Boom, there it is. And I'm going to start with a very simple way of animating. I'm going to take my cube, I'm going to move it all the way over there, and then I'm going to press this keyframe button here, record active objects. Boom. I press that once. I now have a little white keyframe in my timeline preview thing here. That lets me know that that has been recorded. And then I'm going to move my time slider all the way to the end of my animation. I'm going to move my cube to where I want it to be, and then I'm going to press manual record again. Now, you'll notice that if I hover over this little button, it says record active objects. So this will only record the objects that I have selected, and it only records the position, scale, and rotation by default of these objects. Okay, so keyframes, for those people who don't know or haven't yet to sort of figure them out, are like sort of appointments in a diary. They say you will be here at this time, and then you will be here at this time. Thankfully, with the joys of computer animation and digital animation, I don't have to do all of the bits in between. Going back to 2D animation and things, you would have the people who did the keyframes, and they would be the main animators, like, for example, Walt Disney. I'm not sure he actually did any animation, but those main paid animators did the keyframes, like the main positions of animation. The bits, the frames in between, were then done by the tweeners, the people who did the frames in between, the lesser paid and junior animators. Thankfully, my little computer is the junior animator here, and I am the senior animator getting paid for having a cube move from one end of screen to the other. And as you can see, I've got my two keyframes on my timeline, and I have my blue animation track. These little dots represent each individual frame. So you can see that there's more at one end and the other, but they space out in the middle. And if I press play, this is the result. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for me this week. No, not really. But there you go. You can see you've got the really simple animation of a cube moving from left to right. It starts slowly, it speeds up, and then it slows back down again. This is something called easing in and easing out, which we will have a look at a little bit later. So that is a simple manual keyframe. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Let's create a cube, and I'm going to move my cube over there. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on auto keying, which is this second red record button here. The moment I press that, I get the big red outline that says everything that you do here will be recorded, sort of. That's the way it used to work. If I move my cube, you can see that it isn't recording any animations. There was a big change a couple of years ago with one of our versions that stopped this recording absolutely everything that you did. And you have to give it a starting keyframe, very much like After Effects, to say, record this particular information. So I'm going to go to my coordinates tab, and I'm just going to quickly click and hold with my left mouse button and paint over those three, the position, P, X, Y, and Z. This will now tell Cinema, right, I've got some animation tracks of these, you can tell because I've got the red bits, and that says, okay, what do I want to change? What will I record? All of these, depending on where you put them. So now if I go to the end of my animation, like I did before, you can see that my little red animation dots have changed into red rings. This means there is an animation track here, there is a keyframe somewhere, your timeline scrubber is currently not on it. Okay, not a problem. It's just a warning. And now what I'll do, I'll move my cube all the way over there, and I'll let go, and ping, you can see they've become 3 red dots without me having to press the record button, because it's been done via the auto keyframe. If I go halfway through my animation and I move my cube up, can you see that in the attributes manager on the right hand side, I've got the two red rings under X and Z and a yellow, amber, orange, not really quite sure what color that's ever supposed to be, gold, ring that is a warning that says you have edited this, or in the middle of editing this, because I still haven't actually let go of my mouse yet. This is the thing that you are currently changing, and this is a warning. If I let go, bing, you can see now I've got the 3 red dots again, and my animation track has changed. And maybe I want it to move over there. Boom. What if I want it to change size? No dice. Why? Because I haven't keyframed that information anywhere, but I can do. So let me just undo that, and now my cube is the same size. And you can see if I scrub my way through my animation, it moves from one side to another, and it goes up and it goes to the left a bit. Now let's say, okay, I want to keyframe its size, and I'm only going to change its size in Y. So I'll only press the red dot for that, and then at the end of my animation, I'll squidge that down, and now that auto records, and I now have a cube that changes size. So lots of stuff in Cinema 4D is animatable. Basically, anything with one of these animation dots, which when you actually start to look through Cinema 4D, you will discover is about 98% of the things in Cinema 4D you can keyframe, including, if I want to, materials. So with my material selected, I'm going to put a little record keyframe on my color, and at the end of the animation, I'm going to make it red. And now watch, my cube changes color. So there are a whole host of different things that you can keyframe and use and move around to bring things in Cinema 4D to life. I'm going to pause there to see if we've got any questions.
We actually have a couple that not necessarily relating to this, but I thought could be still be handy to answer now, or whether you, or let me know if you're going to get to it later, and then maybe. So,
okay.
Someone's asked, are you able to place 3 objects on one path and get them to start in different places? So I'm thinking,
yes, we will get to that later.
Align to spline, sort of.
Aye.
Yeah, so we will definitely get to that in a little bit. Yeah, and the second one also relates to that, so I'll ask that one.
Oh, okay.
When we get to that.
Okay, right. So let's move on then. Let's have a look at what this actually creates. And I'm going to, I don't know, I did that. I'm going to do file in new, and I'm going to create another cube. Hooray! I like cubes. Cubes are fun. Cubes are exciting. Cubes are easy. So with my 3 objects selected, boom, 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 I'm moving to the left-hand side, and then I'm going to press the record button, pop, which moves and it keeps throwing me. And I'm going to move those over there, and I'm going to click record. Pop. So now I have 3 record buttons, 3 things that are recorded. And I have 3 cubes that move from left to right. You can see that I had all 3 of them at the same time. It's a really useful thing to be able to do. Let's create another cube. Just want to show you something. This cube is not animated, as you can tell, because I've just made it. My keyframes here do not show, because this little timeline preview only shows you the keyframes of what you have selected. So if I hold that cube, you can see that one, and those keyframes are there, that one and that one. But if I select my third one, my keyframes disappear. This is only a preview of your animation keyframes. So if you want to have a look at more in-depth keyframes, then there are a couple of things you can do. We have a timeline, which you can get through window and timeline, or, which I now just can't, there we go, timeline, dope sheet, or F-curve, which we'll come to. Or if you want to have a look at other options, you can go to the top right-hand corner and change the startup layout to animate. And your screen will refresh. And what that does, that gives you a much bigger timeline down the bottom that allows you to see in more detail the keyframes that I have selected. And here they are, so they're the same object, but this time I can see all of the objects that are animated. I don't even have to have them selected. So I can click through them and you can see that if I've got little plus signs on them, so I can open them up, and you can see I've got the position, scale, and rotation for all of them. I've got the position for X, Y, and Z. I've got the scale for X, Y, and Z. I've got the rotation for X, Y, and Z for all 3 of my cubes. Now that was because I pressed the record button, and that records position, scale, and rotation for all 3 of them at the same time, even if I've only actually changed one attribute across the entire thing. So yes, I could have just keyframed each one of them individually for the whichever the x-axis, which is what I've moved them on, but I wanted to show you that what you can do if there's stuff that you don't need, I can just select all of those, press delete, press delete. Let's do the same for scale on those 2 and scale on those 2. And actually, if we open these up, I've even got access to the F curves if somewhat small. You can see that the only keyframe, the only attribute that actually changes is my X position. So I will delete the Y positions as well from both of these. And that just gives me a little bit of a cleaner use. I've got a keyframe here that is my keyframe for position, and I've only got position in there, so I can minimize even those now. And it gives you a parent keyframe. So the cube and position are actually the same keyframe, and that gives you an idea. The summary keyframe lets you know from a very quick look that there is a keyframe here somewhere in your animation on an object. Let's, for example, select my cube 2 keyframe and just move it over here. You can see that its parent keyframe or parent marker moves as well, as does a summary. So it just lets you know that I've got a keyframe in there somewhere. You can drag and draw a box over all of the keyframes and then use the orange slider to move keyframes all in one go. You can even select all of your keyframes like this and then use the little, I'm not quite sure what to describe them as, the little orange bits above to squidge or move entire sets of keyframes all in one go. So that's a really useful aspect of the main timeline that could be very tricky to do on here. You can select them and move them, like you can see that I can actually edit it that way, but the hitbox for it is so tiny that it's probably much easier to use your animation timeline dope sheet mode here. Okay, so what I have is 3 cubes that move from the left hand side to the right hand side. They start on frame 0, they all finish on frame 90. Now we have the ability of changing how it gets there. It can start at the same frame and it will end at the same frame, but its journey can be different depending on what we do with something called the interpolation. And that is the movement, the journey, the space, the speed that it moves between one keyframe and another. We had a quick look at these a second ago, which was this curve. This is known as an F curve. In Cinema 4D, it's known as an F curve. It's generally short for function curve, which is also known in other things. It's also called curves. It's also called graphs. Most 3D or animation programs refer to, it's a different name for exactly the same thing. It is the interpolation between one frame and another. We can see this slightly easier with the dope sheet, with the F curve mode of our timeline. So in our timeline, over the left-hand side, we've got dope sheet mode, which is a picture of a key in it, and then we have an F curve, which is like an F and a little pulse. If I select that, I have my F curve mode, and now I can select my objects to see my F curve. I'm going to select all 3 of them, and then I'm going to press this, which is a picture of like a heartbeat in a black frame, which frames my keyframes and frames the F curve so that I can see it all in my screen. You can move around this timeline with these 2 very similar looking icons, which is by left clicking and moving around that way, or left clicking and doing that. Moving your mouse up and down or left and right will allow you to expand or contract your keyframes to the tiniest possible amount, and then I will press the frame all button again to see my keyframes. Now, with all 3 of these selected, it means that I've actually got access to all 3 of these F curves at once. So I can edit all of these in one go. But I don't want to do that. I want to change the way these work. So I'm just going to make sure I've got one selected. Now, question. If I wanted this to be a constant speed from beginning to end so that it doesn't start slowly, speed up and slow down, there is a way to do that. I could spend quite a while faffing with this to try and make it a straight line, because that's what your F-curve interpolation would need to be. Or I have, thankfully, this linear F-curve interpolation mode where I press the button and it instantly gives me a straight line. So now if I press play, you can see it looks very weird because it looks like it's starting earlier, but it's not. It starts at frame 0 and it still finishes at frame 90. It just does a constant speed rather than jumping from one to the other. Let's have a look at another cube. So let's change this one. What if I wanted this to be at a frame and then be at the next one, so that there's no kind of tweening at all? I can use this, which is my step keyframe, step interpolation. So let's press that button and you'll see that very quickly it'll just pop, because my animation is only 1 frame long. It will go pop and then it will appear. So let's just make life easy for a bit. Let's go for the F curves, and I'm going to select all of my F keyframes, and I'm just going to bring it back to 60. So they still start at the same frame and they still finish at the same frame, but there's just 1 more second so that you can see that one pop. And you can see the 3 different types of F curve that I now have. I've got the linear line, I've got the step line, and I have my spline interpolation. The spline interpolation is exactly that. It is a line that you can adjust. So it's like a path. So this one, it can start slowly and go whoop. So you can see it's the middle one I'm playing with at the moment here. So that's cube. You can see it starts slowly and it gets faster, but it does still start and get there at the same time. You do have the ability of actually overreaching these sometimes, but we have actually now flattened that out, which is much nicer in the latest version, so that you can't go back on yourself. There was a point where it would go crazy with the F curves, but I can play with these F curves to my heart's content. So I can start this one fast and then slow it down, which is what we now have there. So that's very quickly how to look at F curves and change the interpolation. And it's the difference in interpolation that really makes animations come to life. If you animate everything and just do it standard curves, everything starts slowly and slows down, and that's fine. It's technically a principle of animation, but how it gets there in between and faster movements, sharper movements and things like that can really emphasize different parts of animation. So it's really worth bearing in mind. Now, a practical example of that, for those of you wishing to know, is a very simple animation exercise, which is the bouncy ball. So I'm going to create myself a sphere, and I'm going to move my sphere up. And then I'm going to, let's do it the proper way. So let's record that and turn on auto keyframing, and then I'm going to put that at 30, and I'm going to put this down at there. I actually need to make sure that that's at 100. The reason I know that is because my sphere is a 100 radius sphere, so the bottom of the sphere would be, to make the bottom of the sphere at 0, the axis of my sphere needs to be at 100 above y. You can also, I could continue to do that over and over again, or I can cheat. Be efficient, be efficient. Select all of your keyframes like this, and I can hold down Control on my keyboard, it doesn't matter whether it's PC or Mac, and I'm going to move those along till I get to frame 60 and 90. Now I have a sphere that starts down and goes up, goes down, goes up, and I'm just going to squidge this a bit because I'm going to add an extra 30 frames to my animation, which can be done up here. So here I have 90, 90 and 0. 0 and 90 either side is my preview range. That lets me know where I can see my preview range. Sorry, 0 is the beginning end frame. I've completely mussed that up. 0 is the beginning frame, 90 is the end frame. You can see that these is where my preview range starts and finishes, and the top number is where my time slider is. If I want my animation to be longer, I can make that 120, and my animation is now 120 frames long. The band at the bottom auto expands, and I can now select my first frame, and I'm going to control drag that to the other end again, and that means that it now loops. So let's press play, and whee! It will hit hypnotic. All very well and good. I have a sphere that goes up and down, but it doesn't look like it bounces. The reason for that is because of its automatic ease in and ease out, which means that it slows down as it gets to the ground, as it kind of goes, no, please don't hurt me. So what we can do, we can have a look at the F curve for this object, and we can change it. This shows that it slows down, because basically this is a this is a time something graph. In this instance, it's height. It is a value from 0 to something, depending on how high you want to go, for the y-axis. So as a graph, you can see we've got it starts at just above 600, and then it goes all the way down, and when it gets to frame 30, it is at 100. And these are its positioned at each frame, subframe, and whatever, to show that curvature. So for all of those people who remember doing graphs in maths, then this is what it's for. This shows you the movement of this. But we can control this graph using these lovely little handles. So if I do this, I can change the way my interpolation works. But I want to manipulate these differently. So I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard, and I'm going to left click, and I can edit these individually, so that now if I press play, you can see that it starts slowly and then it looks like it hits the ground. The one that I haven't done, bounce, ooh, hovery, and then ooh, bounce, and then hovery. And I can cheat, I can do that again, or of course, because I've already got the keyframes, the interpolation is part of those keyframes, I can control and drag this, and I can overwrite them, and now I have a bouncy ball animation.